RAM and SSD prices are going up every day. If you want to build a computer and get it out of the way, but don't know what to do in this crisis, you're in the right place. I'll quickly summarize how to do this in a way everyone can grasp. Let's begin. 1. RAM and SSD. Normally, these aren't the parts to prioritize when building a PC, but the prices of these two parts rose rapidly after the RAM crisis started. So you need to buy these parts as early as possible and get them out of the way. On the RAM side, you need at least 16 gigabytes. If you want to use your computer for a long time and have the budget for it, you can go up to 24 or 32 gigabytes. Another important topic is the DDR4 and DDR5 distinction. Due to the high prices of DDR5 RAM, some people are still considering DDR4 builds. Just taking the RAM itself into account, there isn't always a massive performance difference between DDR4 and DDR5, especially considering the price. However, because the DDR5 platform features newer processors and motherboards, DDR5 builds can provide higher performance. So, you have to go with DDR5 if you want to build a modern PC. After that comes the balance between megahertz and CL. We don't have the luxury to be picky due to rising costs, so try to pick RAM kits that are affordable and close to these sweet spot values for the best stability. These values are as follows: 3200 MHz CL16 for DDR4 and 6000 MHz CL30 for DDR5. Our last topic is dual-channel RAM. To keep it short, on DDR4 builds, dual-channel is a must. Using two 8GB sticks instead of a single 16GB stick will improve performance. On the DDR5 side, however, this performance gain is way smaller. There isn't a real disadvantage to using a single module. Besides this, stay away from using 4 RAM modules on DDR5 builds as it can lead to stability issues. Next up is the SSD. Let's start with the capacity. I recommend 1 TB or more if you plan to play games or work with a lot of large files, but even 512 GB will be enough for lighter usage. The PCI Express version determines the maximum theoretical speed an SSD can reach, whereas the real-world performance depends on the quality of the SSD. If you don't do production work, these speeds don't provide a noticeable benefit during day-to-day use. I'll leave an SSD database down below so you can determine if an SSD is high quality or low quality. You won't experience any serious problems as long as you stay away from models marked as garbage or low tier here. With that, we complete the two parts that are the hardest to choose today. Now on to the rest of the PC. 2. Graphics cards, GPU. Graphics cards are also affected by the RAM crisis because they have VRAM or video memory on board. There are 3 manufacturers here: NVIDIA, AMD, and Intel. NVIDIA cards are currently the strongest option. They are stronger than their rivals in software technologies, driver support, power efficiency, and general performance. In return, they are also more expensive. While AMD cards are a bit behind in terms of drivers and software, they are still competitive in terms of power efficiency and performance. Their main advantage over NVIDIA cards is that they are more affordable. Intel cards are still new in the GPU market, so they have some shortcomings. While the drivers can be very inconsistent, their power efficiency and performance aren't bad at all for their target audience. They shine with their cheap GPUs in the entry level. But what's important here isn't who the manufacturer is, it's the model of the graphics card itself. If you want to quickly pick a graphics card, I listed some equivalent graphics cards and which resolution they are suitable for in this diagram. I also included some small notes for some cards. You can pick the best option depending on your budget using this diagram. Besides this, stay as far away from 8GB VRAM as possible because these cards can run out of steam on badly optimized modern games, even on 1080p. After picking the GPU model, it's time to pick the AIB model. AIB manufacturers get the GPU from NVIDIA, AMD, or Intel, then add their own cooling and PCB designs to sell to the end user. As you can guess, these models can lead the same GPU to run cooler and quieter. These models are separated into segments within themselves as well. If you don't know which model to pick, you can get an idea by watching this video. This is all you need to know for GPUs. Of course, there are more small details, but we don't have time for that. 3. Processor, CPU. On gaming PCs, the processor is the second most important part after the graphics card. Since its main duty is to feed the graphics card, you don't need to buy a very expensive one unless you're planning to create content. This topic is quite long as well, so I'll only tell you what you need to know. First, let's start with sockets. Today, AMD uses the AM5 socket, while Intel uses the LGA 1851 socket. Intel will switch to the LGA 1954 socket with their upcoming Nova Lake processors, but AM5 will get support until at least 2029. Sockets outside of these are called dead sockets, which means there are no longer any new processors coming out for them. This means your options are limited if you want to upgrade your processor later down the line. Though of course, this doesn't mean that old platforms are now useless. Now let's talk a bit about the letters at the end of processor names. X3D, AMD. X3D processors have a large cache. This provides a significant performance boost, especially on CPU-heavy esports games like Valorant and CS2. While X3D processors in the 5000 and 7000 series fall a week on content creation performance, I can say that the 9000 series is balanced in this regard. F. Intel and AMD. Processors with the F suffix do not have an integrated GPU, meaning you won't get any video output if you don't have a dedicated graphics card. That's why F processors are usually sold for a bit cheaper. If you have the budget for it, I strongly recommend that you pick the AM5 platform. You can easily upgrade when new processors come out in the future, and it's generally pretty good in terms of price to performance. I can especially recommend the Ryzen 5 7500F and the Ryzen 7 9700X. Meanwhile, the Intel side has been overshadowed by AMD in terms of price to performance for the past few generations now. That's why it's difficult for me to recommend it to most users building a new PC. If you absolutely have to go with Intel, I can recommend the Core Ultra 5 245K, 250K+, and Ultra 7 270K+ for the LGA 1851. However, if your budget is incredibly tight, I still recommend going for the LGA 1700 and DDR4 platform. Some processors in the 13th and 14th generations, like the 13700KF, can perform even better compared to some recent AM5 processors. That's the simplest way I can explain CPUs without getting into their anatomy. Now up next is a very misunderstood component. 4. Motherboard. First of all, you have to keep this in mind. The duty of a motherboard is to run the parts you install on it. It doesn't directly grant you higher performance. But if you buy a weak motherboard, you won't be able to fully make use of the potential of the parts you install on it. If you forget this simple rule, you could find yourself spending more money for no reason. The motherboard is a part that is way more dependent on your use scenario. That's why I'll only tell you the ground rules for you to be able to pick your motherboard for yourself and leave it at that. To simplify, I'll take the AM5 platform as a reference. First, let's get the chipset topic out of the way. You can think of the chipset as the determining factor of the features the motherboard can provide in that generation. If a motherboard is labeled X870, it has to meet the specifications that chipset requires. On the table you can see on the screen, I labeled chipsets that are almost identical using the same color. On AM5, so many people wasted their money thinking higher numbers must mean better. That's why you should know your needs and choose accordingly. If I have to make a recommendation, stay away from motherboards with the B840, A620, and A620A chipsets on the AM5 platform. Since they are very entry-level, this can be quite limiting. Maybe you can get a B840 motherboard if you find it at a very cheap price, but that doesn't happen often either. The next topic is the model of the motherboard. The chipset is important, but it's not everything. For example, a high-quality B650 motherboard can provide more features than an entry-level X670. I can't explain everything without making a comprehensive motherboard guide, so I'll leave databases where you can compare AM5 and LGA 1700 motherboards down below. If you want a motherboard guide video, don't forget to mention it in the comments. So what should you pay attention to when buying a cheap motherboard? First of all, you should check the brand because these brands are the ones creating BIOS updates for motherboards, and BIOS support directly affects the stability of the PC. You can trust Gigabyte, Asus, MSI, and ASRock in this regard. Stay away from no-name products. Next, the presence of a second M2 slot makes it easier to increase storage later down the line. In terms of RAM, having 4 slots is a very significant advantage for DDR4 builds. But due to the stability issues I mentioned on DDR5 builds, 2 slots will be enough. VRM is the circuit that powers the processor. Ideally, you want a high phase count first, followed by a high ampere rating. This is usually distinctive on mid-range motherboards. You unfortunately don't get to choose at the entry level. Lastly, we have the form factor. Motherboards usually come in ATX, Micro ATX, or Mini ITX sizes. The case you choose has to support the form factor of your motherboard. Since motherboards as a topic can get very long if I go into the small details, I have to stop here. 5. CPU cooler. There are 2 types of CPU coolers on the market: air coolers and AIO or liquid coolers. But the first major mistake usually starts here. Never think AIOs are better than air coolers just because they look cooler. Most 240mm mid to high-end AIOs are weaker than an average air cooler. Plus, since AIOs are more complex systems, they are more prone to failure, run noisier, and are more expensive. If you really need liquid cooling, you should turn towards powerful models with at least a 360mm radiator like Arctic Liquid Freezer 3, which isn't even necessary unless you have a high-end Intel processor or certain Ryzen 9000 series models. On the other hand, air coolers are simple, cheap, and long-lasting. Don't underestimate their performance. And some models can look great too. And that's what I recommend. Pick a good air cooler and stay away from the AIO obsession unless you really have to get one. What you should look for is simple: radiator size, heat pipe count, heat pipe diameter, tower count, and a 120mm fan. If you're stuck between two models, check the fan specifications. The model with higher CFM, higher static pressure, millimeter of water, and lower noise levels will usually be the better choice. On the AIO side, however, you have to check tests and reviews. This is because pump quality, radiator structure, fan performance, and other components can change the results significantly. The specs on paper can be very misleading here. There's a small note I need to add here. Some processors can easily be used with the stock fan, but the stock fan sounding like a jet engine can be very annoying. So switching to a cheap 120mm fan with 4 heat pipes just because of this will be a nice plus. 6. Power supply. PSU. Don't cheap out on a part that carries the entire build like this one. But at the same time, don't overspend just because it's high quality. As this topic can get quite complicated when we get down to the details, it's not possible for me to explain everything in this video. So I'll leave you a database. You can check that out as well. First, let's iron out a common misunderstanding. Forget about the 80+ certification. This certification measures how efficiently the PSU converts the electricity it draws from the wall outlet. It denotes, for example, whether an 850-watt PSU takes 900 or 880 watts to deliver that power. It is not an indicator of PSU quality. Okay, how will you calculate the wattage you need? Firstly, you should check the TGP or the TBP value for your graphics card. You can find these values in heavy benchmarking tests or graphics card reviews. For your processor, you need to use the highest power consumption seen in tests as a reference. Tech PowerUp is a great resource for this. For the motherboard, SSD, RAM, fans, and liquid cooler, if you have one, you can just add a flat 100 to 150 watts. It doesn't have to be super accurate. Let's roughly calculate using example figures. CPU, 120 watts. GPU, 220 watts. Other components, 150 watts. All of this totals to 490 watts. A 550-watt PSU will be enough to power this build. But it's also important to future-proof your build. That's why I always recommend at least 650 watts. Nowadays, 650 or 750 watts will be more than enough for most builds. But if your budget is low, you can use this calculation method. Another important point is this. NVIDIA has been using a thick cable named 12-volt high power since the RTX 40 series. This cable provides more power using a single cable. Some PSUs and GPUs come with this cable. Since RTX 5080 and higher GPUs draw large amounts of power, it would make more sense to get a higher quality PSU that has this connector built in as opposed to using an adapter. The subject of modularity is totally up to you. There are non-modular, semi-modular, and fully modular PSUs out there. They allow you to change your cables or remove unused cables. Thanks to this, you can get a nicer looking PC. It has no effect on performance. 7. Case. The case, at its core, is a metal box with fans. Besides some important rules, it's up to your tastes. The compatibility of the case is the most important point you should pay attention to. Make sure to check these: the height of your CPU cooler, if you're using liquid cooling, the size and the thickness of your radiator, the form factor of your motherboard, the length of your graphics card, the dimensions of the fans you'll add on, and lastly, your PSU's dimensions. The other point after this is how many fans the case comes with out of the box. In standard cases, there should be at least 3. For aquarium-type cases, I recommend 4 and up if it's compact and 5 and up if otherwise. The front side of the case should be mesh. It should be easy for the case to pull air in. Otherwise, system temperatures can get higher for no reason. Stuff like cabling channels and dust filters vary depending on the quality. Now you know what kind of PC you should build during the RAM crisis. So what will you play on your new computer? Don't forget to comment down below. If you liked the video, don't forget to hit the like button. If not, feel free to dislike it. Stay mysterious until the next video. Take care, and bye.